Okay, so this is the first video in my series of Prime Ministers, and I will be talking about Sir Robert Walpole, who is generally considered Britain's first Prime Minister. Now, as I said in the last video, the term Prime Minister was not formal at this time. The correct term was First Lord of the Treasury, the formal term I should say. It wasn't until the 20th century with Sir Henry Campbell Bannerman that the term actually became formalised. So I'm going to speak a little bit about Walpole. He was not only Britain's first Prime Minister, he was also by far the longest serving, if you take the date of his, let's say, the time he is arguably became the Prime Minister. Like I say, this is an important fact to bear in mind. The Prime Minister in this country was not a formal title. So this is more a historical recognition of when he first assumed control of government. And there's debate all about that. There's two dates, 1721 and 1730. So a little bit about Sir Robert Walpole. He was born in 1676 in Houghton Hall in Norfolk. When he basically rose to the position of Prime Minister, he was already pretty influential figure in government. He'd been serving in the cabinet. At this time, 1721, Britain was just recovering from the economic situation known as the South Sea Bubble, which arose from speculation of the South Sea Company, around the South Sea Company. His full title was Sir Robert Walpole, 1st Earl of Orford. Now I should tell you I'm reading directly from the 10 Downing Street page here. I'll put a link to that. So this is the entry on Sir Robert Walpole. Today, often viewed as the first British Prime Minister, Walpole was described by contemporary opponents as a screenmaster general, adept at pulling all the political strings. Sir Robert Walpole, 1st Earl of Orford, was born on 26th of August 1676 at Houghton in Norfolk. His father, another Robert, was a prominent Norfolk landowner and MP. Robert Jr. was admitted to Eton in 1690, becoming a King's Scholar. He entered King's College, Cambridge in April 1696, but his university education was cut short by the death of his eldest brother in 1698. Walpole returned to Norfolk, now the heir, to learn how to manage the family estates, and married the daughter of a wealthy timber merchant, Catherine Shorter, soon afterwards. The death of his father in November 1700 helped his political career, as he took his place as MP for Castle Rising in 1701. And I just put my own word in there. You have to remember, we were not really a full democracy at this point, far from it. And quite often constituencies were very different from what they are today. And they covered different sorts of areas, and nepotism was involved, and they weren't elected, certainly not by common suffrage. So that's an important point to remember. At the general election of 1702, he secured the seat at King's Lynn, which he was to hold with a short intermission in 1712 until 1742. Walpole's father had been a Whig, a supporter of the 1688 to 1689 Glorious Revolution, which gave Britain a constitutional monarchy. Robert Jr. inherited those views, although he was also perceived as a political moderate and an efficient administrator. His political rise was swift. He became Secretary at War in 1708 and Treasury of the Navy in 1710 to 1711. By the way, that was around the time of the Spanish War of Succession. However, his involvement in the prosecution of Tory preacher Henry Sacheverell had consequences. The Tory government elected in 1710 targeted Walpole. He was found guilty of corruption and briefly imprisoned in the Tower of London in 1712, becoming a Whig martyr in the process. The accession of the Hanoverian King George I in 1714 returned the Whigs to power. Walpole was appointed First Lord of the Treasury and Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1715, but following his brother-in-law and political mentor Charles II Viscount Townshend, Lord Townshend, into opposition in 1717, when the Whigs split. He resumed office as First Lord and Chancellor in April 1721, and retained both positions until February 1742, an unusually long tenure by any standard. Now it's that second, this is my own wording by the way, that second assumption of office which historians generally regard as his beginning of Walpole's premiership. This return to office coincided with a serious financial crisis following the South Sea bubble, and Walpole played an important role in restoring government credit. His skill in retaining office when George I died in 1727 was noteworthy in an age when a new monarch typically meant a new administration. In other words, Walpole basically saw two monarchs. It's usually the other way around. Usually monarchs go through several prime ministers. His approach to politics relied on careful management of the House of Commons and a tendency to avoid confrontation where possible. He cultivated backbench support carefully and enjoyed fine wine and good company. He tried to keep taxes low for landowners and was sceptical about the benefits of an expansive foreign policy, knowing that he had to sell the policy and taxes to Parliament. Traditionally regarded as the first Prime Minister, Walpole lived in 10 Downing Street from 1735, having insisted that it would become the residence of the First Lord of the Treasury, rather than being given to him personally. Royal support helped him survive a serious crisis over tax plans in 1733, but in 1742 a combination of opposition from the Prince of Wales and a deteriorating foreign political situation forced his resignation. George II raised him to the peerage as Earl of Orford, and he remained a close confidant of the king until his death in 1745. And when he died, he was 68 years old. So we can say that in retrospect, Walpole is viewed as a very able administrator, in the sense that the sheer tenure in itself is something to be admired, but he was a very adept politician. He knew how to pull those strings and win favour from all sides. He was close friends with the King and Queen, King George II and Queen Caroline, and he was a very skilled administrator in that sense, because he knew how to politically manoeuvre, and that takes some skill actually in any era. Walpole kept us out of the War of the Polish Succession in the 1730s, but towards the end of the tenure, I mentioned there the increasingly fragile foreign situation. I suspect that refers to the outbreak of the War of Jenkins' Ear, which was an unusual name. That was a war between Great Britain and Spain from 1739 to 1748. The unusual name refers to the fact that an ear was severed from Robert Jenkins, captain of a British merchant ship, and the severed ear was subsequently exhibited before Parliament, hence the War of Jenkins' Ear. That term was coined by Thomas Carlyle in 1858. So there was the War of Jenkins' Ear, 1739 to 1748, and another war that broke out was the War of the Austrian Succession in 1740. So most of Walpole's tenure was peaceful, but towards the end you had those two conflicts. Several other things about Walpole. Several important acts were passed in his administration. And two of those which I will quote was the Distress for Rent Act 1737, which was for the more effectual securing the payment of rents and preventing frauds by tenants, and the Gaming Act of 1738, an act for the more effectual preventing of excessive and deceitful gaming, bearing in mind that was very popular at the time. Also the Parliamentary Privilege Act of 1737, to amend an act passed in the 12th and 13th year of the reign of King William III, entitled An Act for Preventing Any Inconveniences that May Happen by Privilege of Parliament. Walpole was a Whig. So, just to sum things up, he was in office from 1721 to 1742, born in 1676, died in 1745, Britain's first Prime Minister, Sir Robert Walpole.